people are in denial. They want to think the world continues. The scientists that we deal with are the top-notch scientists around the planet. A team of scientists and researchers with contributors in pretty much every major scientific field around the world. Why should you believe the information we're collecting? Most of the information we're collecting is being made publicly available, and it is publicly accessible by most people. These are not opinions of one person, a dozen, or even 100, but the top leading scientists in many of these fields. The scientists actually go out and dig up stuff, and we do more than just sit back and collect the information and analyze it. We actually have scientists fly to us. We go to them. We just came back from the Middle East with an entire film and production crew looking at some ancient documentation, about 4,000 documents where some of the oldest predictions in the world are for what's about to happen exist. So we do not sit back and, come up with theories. In fact, that was the reason why the Horizon Project was built in the first place. It was literally built and designed to solve some of the world's most puzzling anomalies or questions. We believe we have solved one, and it's an absolute, it's a scary one. Based on the years of research we have undergone to conclude that from the physical evidence, historical documentation, and the scientific evidence, what we now know, cutting-edge technology, cutting-edge science, that Earth's history and our inevitable future is not what we've been commonly taught. Let me give you an example. Most of us have been taught that Earth changes are extremely slow and occur over millions of years. The best example I can think of mass population being informed of this is the forming of the 7 continents. We're taught that they broke apart from a single large continent positions today. It took millions of years. However, the actual physical evidence shows that this is not the case at all, that the continents actually broke apart and moved to their respective positions in just a few short years, no more than a maximum of a couple hundred years, not the millions of years that scientists say. The periods between these global upheavals, massive instantaneous global upheavals, are very, very slow and occur over thousands and millions of years. But between these upheavals, you have the slow geology, and that is where the original theories came from, because that's what the scientists see, because they're not around when these massive upheavals happen. And new scientific evidence, when we actually study the ocean floors, in this particular example, when we actually go down and study the ocean floors, we see the ocean floors do not replicate a millions of years theory, but an instantaneous theory. For example, if the Atlantic Ridge is separating Europe from the United States, which it is, the two continents, a few centimeters per year, then computing the distance back, saying that they were one continent one time, you could easily surmise how many millions of years ago these two continents matched up like a puzzle. That's the theory. That's where they came up with the original estimate. However, if Europe and America are separating, then the Pacific Ocean is shrinking, conversely, and it is older, whereas the newer Atlantic Ridge would be newer mass, newer plant, newer animal life, newer decayed animals on the ocean floor there, and newer sediments. So when you look at the sediment substrate on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, and you compare it to the, quote, theoretically older settlements by millions of years of the substrates on the Pacific Ocean, you should see a vast difference in age. We don't. In fact, they're almost identical. It was an instantaneous event for the most part. It wasn't a slow migration of continents away from each other. A sudden, catastrophic global effect altered the Earth's north and south poles. Geographic pole shift. This created a new centrifugal force geometry on the planet, which caused basically the continent to break up and to reorient themselves in a matter of just a couple hundred years to their current positions. And then once they got close to their current positions, which would only take a couple hundred years, then the slow process started moving over the last few tens of thousands of years of the continents repositioning precisely in these where they're at today. The evidence suggests that the sudden physical pole shifts having dramatic cataclysmic results pretty much decimate most of the life on the Earth. And each time this occurs, they occur very quickly, and quickly meaning within a few days. And the evidence does indicate that we are on the doorsteps of the next shift. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen 50 years from now. But all the evidence that we've been able to collect indicates the next one is about to happen. But one thing these ancient prophecies and modern prophecies talk about, they come from different cultures, different countries, different languages, different eras of mankind, even on different planets. And they all point to the same thing, and they're all saying approximately the same thing, pointing to this particular moment in time, this part of human history. They're all saying the same thing. They're not saying 100 different things. They're all saying the same thing. And they don't know each other, and they're in different countries, different languages, scattered over the last 3,000 years. When you see that, you have to sit up and take notice, because why would they all be saying the same thing? Is going to come true. 100% of what we have been working on for the last 5 to 6 years is based on science. In fact, we have completely exhausted to the point where we are so confident that this event is going to happen, we have actually turned our attention to prophecy. And what we find out, not actually that surprising to us, is that prophecy is matching the science that we have uncovered. So what we have actually uncovered is science, and that was our entire forte. But we have delved and will continue to delve into the prophecy, because the prophecy seems to not only augment the science, but it is actually talking about events that are occurring today that science could never know. How the Mayans did it, we have no clue. We can't even comprehend how they could have had such knowledge. We do know that their mathematics was actually beyond the mathematics that we have today. Granted, they don't have computers, they couldn't compute things quickly, but their mathematics, for instance, in their calendar systems, as it existed back then, are far more accurate and precise than our calendar systems are today. Where they got that knowledge, we don't know. In fact, it was only determined just in the last few years that their, quote, ending date for the era, it's not really an ending date, it's the ending date of a large cycle, which then starts a new, what they refer to as a new era, a new age. December 21st, 2012, its ending date corresponds to the closest place that the Earth and our solar system approaches the middle of the galactic plane, and that was only confirmed by our astrophysicists within the last few years using computer models. So how they were able to determine this a couple thousand years ago is honestly beyond, our ability to understand. The galactic plane is a dense gravitational field. The closer you get to the center of it, the more dense the field becomes, and as you pass through it, it becomes less dense. It's not a paper-thin line in space. It is actually a spiraling plane that all these stars in our Milky Way galaxy revolve around. And our solar system, with its star, the sun, moves cyclically up and down it on a period of every half period is 11,500 years. So we're approaching that half period point in just the next few years. But it takes, because of the thickness of the plane and the thickness of our solar system, it takes about 20 years to pass through. We're already about halfway through. It started in 1998 when the Earth started to feel the effects of the pressure wave or gravitational wave exerting from the galactic plane, exerting on the solar system. And that, the very first effect we saw is the Chandler wobble of the Earth, which was a very, very stable wobble for hundreds of years, suddenly stopped. And now, since then, it has been acting erratic. The next thing we saw is that in the year of a solar minimum, the sun went on a massive rampage, more X-class flares than we've ever seen before. In fact, a couple of the flares were beyond what the satellites could measure, and it took out 2 of the satellites. So they've actually had to redefine the X-class scale. They're guesstimating. They don't know what the most intense flare was because it went off the scale, but they're guesstimating anywhere between an X28 and an X43. We reached the closest spot on December 21st, 2012. The solar system we have pretty well mapped out, but the astrophysicists today have mapped out that we will approach within 3 degrees of the center of the galactic plane and then start veering away from it. So we, as a solar system, have the greatest gravitational force. The astrophysicists in the last few years have concluded that every active galaxy has what they refer to, for lack of a better word, a supermassive black hole in the center of the galaxy. Now, as black holes get larger, they spin faster. And even though small black holes are absolutely solid-packed, dense neutrons, as they spin faster and faster because they get more massive, the inside of the larger black holes start to become more hollow. So that larger black holes are 90% of all the mass is in a shell, like an eggshell. As you increase the black hole even further, or these black holes get larger, the tops and the bottoms open up because you're spinning incredibly fast. They do not know what causes the spin rate to reach a maximum velocity. The larger it is, the faster it spins. So that when you get to a black hole that's 4 trillion miles across at the center of our galaxy, the top and the bottom have opened up to the point where it's a flat ribbon. It is actually not a sphere. It's a flat ribbon spinning 4,000 miles across, and it looks like a ribbon. The gravitational wave that emanates from that black hole forms the equivalent of like a LP record, a disk that spins in conjunction with the black hole. So the gravitational wave radiates from there in a flat plane, and it moves in a circle around the black hole. Now, all the stars in the galaxy, the spiral arms of the galaxy, are attracted to the gravitational wave. They have recently concluded that galaxies are formed by it's the chicken and the egg scenario. The black hole comes first. Then the stars form. They don't know how, but the stars form and cyclically move up and down the gravitational plane of the black hole and then around it. Our solar system is one of those stars, and we are moving in a rhythmatic cycle above and below that plane. And this rhythmatic cycle is the cycle that the Mayans computed when we go through the plane, when we come out of the plane. In fact, they referred to it as the dark rift. And they also referred to what scientists would say are attributes of moving into a black hole. In other words, Einstein computed that if you move to a black hole, time and space would be distorted and there would be some sort of dimensional rift. In fact, one of the Mayan legends indicates that when the 4 corners of the earth, referring to this time coming up, when the 4 corners of the earth sits on the dark rift, and we still call it the same thing that the Mayans did, the dark rift, then a cosmic sky portal will be opened up and, quote, souls will be harvested, whatever that means. But it seems to imply a dimensional rift, which implies a tremendous gravitational force equivalent to that would be generated from a black hole. Our science is based on science and physical evidence. And what we do see is that the science backs up the fact that the gravitational wave from the center of the galaxy is spinning and causing the stars to revolve up and down cyclically through it and around the galaxy. The astrophysicists today are now have uniformly basically realized and have stated that in the center of every galaxy is an active black hole, a supermassive black hole. 10 years ago, the concept was ludicrous. A black hole even existed in the center of a galaxy, never mind what we're describing now. The quantum physicists say that the gravitational wave, if such a black hole exists, even this far away from the center of the galaxy, would be the equivalent of you actually passing through the black hole itself. In other words, you're bending time and space. And this is the type of concept these sorts of predictions would be, I guess, written down by ancient prophecies. The evidence we have, what I want to present, first and foremost, is all the science. And what happened in the past, we don't rely on remote viewing. We don't use it at all. Strictly based on, geologists, physicists, astrophysicists, linguistics experts, and, studying physical evidence around the planet. Yeah, I do know that with regard to the upcoming event that we are seeing from a scientific standpoint, as a remote viewer, indicated that they saw a passing space body, a heavenly space body moving between the Earth and the Sun, preceding this event of a shift, but preceding this event, a planet-sized, very large one, which would trigger a very large solar flare from the sun. In fact, we see, from a scientific standpoint, we know that this is most likely the planet Jupiter, because coincidentally, every 24,000 years, the planet Venus, aligns on the southern ecliptic of the sun with Earth every 24 to 26,000 years, and that alignment occurs just before we hit the midpoint of the solar system, reaching the galactic center. We do not use any remote viewing. 15 years ago, and it is an amazing tool, but we don't use it because it doesn't give us the detail or the vast amount of incredibly detailed information we need in all the various disciplines of study we need. We rely on the top-notch scientists literally on the planet, going to them and them coming to us in order to cross-reference the data to make sure that we don't miss anything. We do not use it at all. The amount of information you get from remote viewing is extremely small compared to the raw scientific data that you can acquire with physical evidence. I mean a physical pole shift. The Earth spins on its axis, and we have the top and the bottom of the axis we call the north and south geographic poles. And then we also have a geographic equator, as if it were a top that was spinning in space. When a pole shift occurs, instead of the Earth spinning on its normal axis, it starts to wobble suddenly, and this is usually caused by an outside influence, as if it was off balance, and then it equalizes into a new spinning position. Anyone who played with a top, they know if they touch the top while it's moving, it wobbles instantly and reorients itself. And that is what we refer to as the pole shift. But when it reorients itself, the physical locations for the north and south poles have moved. The Earth is now spinning on a different imaginary axis. Now, that may not seem all that bad, but what happens is this. The Earth, while it spins, has centripetal force, centrifugal force that actually pushes out the diameter, the geographic diameter of the planet at the equator, approximately 42 kilometers wider than the distance between the North and South Pole. So if you move the physical poles, that pushing out of where the old equator used to be will suddenly fall back down because the centrifugal force is not there, and the new equator will be pushed out. Basically what happens is the continents reshape themselves almost immediately to compensate for the new equator being pushed out. Now, 42 kilometers is about 26 miles. So you have about 13 miles on each side of the planet that is pushed out. Landmass is pushed out at the geographic equator. That is a greater distance than the highest mountains on the planet. So during this time, and since the planet is covered by 70% water, during this sloshing about, as the Earth wobbles, it reorients itself to equalize the external pressure. What happens is the oceans literally decimate all the coastal areas around the planet. And in addition to that, continents will actually sink beneath the ocean and other continents will rise up. So it is actually incredibly devastating. We have evidence that this has happened at many times in the past, at least 3 separate times in the past. One of the things you would see, well, the last time it happened, the evidence shows that it happened at approximately 9050 BC. What you would see, this isn't the entire Earth being volcanized, for example. It's the pole shifting. So you have entire continents not being torn apart, but dropping into the ocean, which means if they have cities on them, those complete intact cities, call it New York City in the future, just simply drops into the ocean. So future civilizations a few thousand years later can look at the bottom of the ocean and see the remnants of the city. That's what we see all over the planet today. We see cities off the coast of Cyprus, Japan, India, Cuba. We see them at the bottom of Lake Fuxan in China. They cover the globe. And these cities are not just minor debris. They're major metropolitan areas, massive rock structures in these ancient cities, which have temples, pillars, pyramids, streets, etc. So these they weren't constructed at the bottom of the ocean, and the land they rested on is intact. They just simply dropped to the bottom of the ocean, And in addition, when the pole shift reorients at the equator, new land masses, which were at the bottom of the equator, suddenly move with the new centrifugal force pushing the landmass out, move to the light of day. An example of that is just west of Las Vegas, at the top of the mountains, we have Coral Head, which is approximately 11,500 years, dating the same, the carbon dating to 9,000 BC. So the area of Nevada in the vicinity of Las Vegas, at a minimum, was at the bottom of the ocean about 12,000 years ago. So we don't know how much of the land mass has moved up. Obviously, the closer to the equator, the more it moves up. The further away, it doesn't have as much force, so it's going to stay where it's at. When we started studying prophecy, when we started collecting the documents is the first part. Going through 10,000 documents is the hard part. It requires an incredible staff of people collecting it and consolidating it into categories. The first thing we notice is that almost every ancient culture on the planet, regardless of what language, what century they lived in, almost every ancient culture has legends of high technology, that once existed before them. They talk about a civilization that was before them that had high technology, and B, that civilization was wiped out by some sort of water-based event. That about 25% of the world's population right now lives within 50 to 80 miles from a coast. And that represents basically 2 billion people would probably die within a matter of a day or two when the event happens. And what happens after that's not the end of it. I wish I could say that was it. And within a matter of months, probably another third of the planet would die due to lack of food, clean water, and medical supplies. Because this kind of decimation, you can't send out the Red Cross. I mean, there's no roads, there's no infrastructure, there's no communications, there's no technology. The power grid is gone. And so basically you've been thrown into the dark ages. And in high-tech societies like the United States, Europe, we would suffer the most. We're used to going to grocery stores and getting food. The so-called third world countries wouldn't suffer as dramatically because they're already used to poverty and fending for themselves and growing their own crops. So even though it would be serious for them, they would continue to grow and thrive where it would be more difficult for us. And when food runs out, and that's still not the end of the story. Now we're talking two-thirds of the population. When food runs out, now you have people turning on each other. What I found out about 6 months ago was the food supply that we have for the residents of a country usually is depleted in 3 days. If something should happen catastrophic to this nation, for instance, a massive power grid failure, the whole grid goes down, 3 days later, the entire food supply for the country would be gone because transportation would come to a halt. You can't drive the trucks to deliver food. All the shelves in the supermarkets would be gone in 3 days. What do you do when there's no more food? And then, which was interesting, getting people to take some sort of chip. See, at that point, people would gladly take a chip under the right circumstances. They would line up because tremendous poverty and hunger is a great motivating, equalizing force. Doesn't matter whether you're a doctor or a lawyer or a ditch digger. You need food and you need medical supplies. So if you can get that freely from the government by just taking a chip to, quote, track you to make sure that you don't get more than your fair share, it seems plausible. I think most people would line up and say, give me the chip, then give me my food. So I think there are scenarios which could actually lead to those type of predictions. Along with shifting of the pole, that is what would happen as well. But those would be short-term. A lot of dust would go up in the air, and the resultant aftermath of the dust would cool the planet, and we would end up having a mini ice age. We see, if you look back at the ice core samples for the past 600,000 years, you see that approximately every 110,000 years there is a tremendous increase in CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, and almost immediately after that, an ice age. And we would be at the forefront of another ice age when that happened. But in terms of what else happens to the planet, much of the sea life would die because they can't live in murky waters. As we pass through the galactic plane, supposing the event was caused, the pole shift was caused by the external influence of the galactic plane, as we pass through it, there is a lot of debris that is sitting on the galactic plane, on that gravitational field that does not move cyclically up and down. It has lost its kinetic energy. It's just sitting there. We're talking massive asteroids, planet-sized asteroids, in fact, in some cases, and they're just sitting there. And our solar system is racing toward that plane. In fact, if you look at the computer-simulated models of our galaxy, and we look at the Hubble telescope, looks at other galaxies, you can see this dark line, where we call this line the edge of the galaxy, and the Mayans call it the dark rift. And it's dark because the light from the stars can't get through it because it has a lot of debris sitting there. So as the solar system moves through this debris, the asteroids in the debris will be plunging through our solar system, hitting the Earth. So we would expect to be hit by a number of asteroids, large asteroids and small asteroids. I live about 90 miles from the coast, about 700 feet up near a mountain. Let me tell you how serious the scientists, when you look at the data, at first they're in denial. But there is so much overwhelming evidence that the scientists themselves, they come to their own conclusions, and they come to the conclusion that, yes, when you look at this data, and it's beyond overwhelming, they have to take this seriously. And one scientist went home to his wife, and they had built their dream house after 40 years on the Atlantic coast, on the East Coast. And, I mean, massive, beautiful dream house. And the wife said to him, okay, so if this is really true and this is going to happen and this is the data, what are we going to do? And he just looks up at her and says, you're right. And within a year, they moved. They moved to Kentucky. They abandoned their dream house because they feel it's coming back quickly. And most of the scientists we deal with, they see the evidence. A lot are in denial. I would be in denial, but I'm more of an engineer and scientist. I have to look at the data, and it's overwhelming. We collect the information literally from all over the planet. We have scientists that are experts in ancient technology, geologists, physicists, quantum physicists, general physics, underwater cities who study that, ancient civilizations. And there are a number of people who actually study past cataclysms and even map out where the past few poles were based on physical evidence scattered around the planet. What we are doing is we're collecting and compiling all the information as it comes in. We believe that we will be finished this year with our compilation. And this will include not only the scientific work, but the prophecy work, and then we're going to release it all before the end of this year. I believe that every high-tech government on this planet knows exactly what's going on. In fact, if you knew what was going on, you would take, just in my humble opinion, you would take one of two stances. You would either let things go, let the economy go, let everything go to pieces, because why? Why bother trying to build it up in a few years? It's already going to be destroyed. Or you try to do something that will set yourself up so that your country can have some sort of edge after the effect. For instance, Norway, they built a seed bank like an emergency measure. And why? Under normal circumstances, this seems like it would be a very logical thing to do, to protect the 3 million seeds on Earth. But the speed and the necessity for which they felt they had to build this vault, and particularly the location, they chose it above the Arctic Circle, and they also dug into solid rock about 600 feet above ocean level, above sea level. Now, if there's a pole shift, the waters won't rise that high, being that far north. The poles would actually have to shift quite a bit, perhaps even 90 degrees before it even would approach that. The odds of that particular mountain with the worst-case scenario pole shift actually going under the waters are practically nil. But the speed at which they built it, they started this project in 2007, they completed it in 2008, and now they are asking for all the world's countries in order to populate the vault with seeds immediately. And, you know, they're trying to protect it from what? The only thing on that rock are polar bears, from our understanding. And it would be a difficult, if not impossible, place to check in and out seeds as you need them. So it is a truly doomsday type of vault, but why build it so quickly? So they must know something. They actually, well, the way they did it, it's interesting. They got the UN's permission to do this. The UN is part of this, actually. And then they announced to the world that all the countries of the world can put their seeds in the vault, and they are encouraging it, and that the country is able to withdraw the seeds out of the vault at any time they desire. However, if we have this event, the countries won't be able to readily have access to this vault, of course. But it does make you think that because of the speed at which they did this and the place at which they built this vault, it makes you think there's something more to it, that they do know something. A lot of the governments around the world are starting to do things that don't really make political or economic sense, but it would in light of what we do believe is coming up in the future. There's a number of subtle things that are being hinted to. For instance, we've all heard of the one world order. If we have a worldwide collapse, we already have to have in place pretty much a single unified structure to have a single government. A single political system, single currency. An economic collapse would pretty much guarantee a single currency because all the countries would have to consolidate somehow. Brown indicated that all the countries in the world must band together in order to solve this financial crisis. Prime Minister Brown, he said that if all the countries in the world band together, we might be able to resolve this. Otherwise, there's no hope. It's going to be a global collapse. And the very concept of a global economic collapse was unheard of a year ago. They would have thought you were crazy if you even said global economy. Now we're saying global economic collapse, and we see it happening everywhere. But one of the precursor events, the precursor events will be subtle compared to the massive pole shift, which will basically wipe out 4 billion people within 6 months, and then a Mad Max scenario. But so these quote subtle events, I'm calling them subtle with respect to the major event, but the events themselves have tremendous significance when you look at all of them being combined. As the solar system, including the Earth, moves closer to the galactic plane, it is going to feel the effects of the gravitational pull of this plane more and more. So it will affect not only the Earth, it will affect the rest of the planets in the solar system, it will affect the Sun. It's not just Earth-centric, it affects the whole solar system. So we see that the planet's temperatures of the inner 5 planets have all risen a slight bit, including the Earth. We see that the Sun is starting to go on a rampage. We see that the gravitational effects, this external gravitational effects on the Earth, we would project and predict that even though the earthquake and tectonic activity would not continue to occur in the same stable places where they were around the planet. They would tend to move. In other words, earthquakes would occur in diverse places. In other words, places where they normally don't occur for thousands of years. We're starting to see more of those. In fact, people build populations on non-earthquake areas, except in California. But now that these earthquakes are happening in places all over the world where earthquakes normally would never be expected to occur, many, many people are dying. Last year alone, over 88,000 people died due to earthquakes. In fact, the number of earthquakes that have occurred in populated areas has increased 6 to 10 times in the last 10 years. So the frequency and intensity of earthquakes that are killing people is going through the roof, because those earthquakes are occurring in populated areas where they didn't occur before. To see a graph of this, so you can see in real time what this graph looks like over the last 100 years, you can see that. But getting to Yellowstone is a situation that all the scientists and geologists are praying will not occur. There's a tremendous amount of seismic activity underneath Yellowstone right now. And Yellowstone is unique because the magma underneath Yellowstone releases a gas, and the magma is coming toward the surface, and the gas is becoming released with greater intensity each day. The problem is the magma coming up compresses the gas and creates a very explosive, high-pressure situation under Yellowstone, similar to what we saw at Mount St. Helens years ago. However, this is much more vast, and we're dealing with molten lava. So they're just praying that this settles down and goes away, which it could. But these type of things we would expect to see as one of the things, because the Earth is being affected externally. But when you take a look at not just Yellowstone, but when you take a look at hundreds of other anomalies around the world that are happening, and in the solar system, you see that there's something definitely going on. Extreme weather. Let's back up just a couple years talking about weather. In 2006, the National Climate Data Center released their 2006 report showing the significant and extreme weather anomalies around the world, and they indicated that never before has there been so many droughts, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, and in places where they normally do not occur ever in the history of their recording. Now, that's in 2006. Guess what? The very next year, they then report that 2007 was the weirdest weather year on record, as these disasters continue to increase. So in other words, 2007 topped even 2006 report. Let me give you a few examples of the oddities and the frequency in the last few years, and then I'd like to cap it with a report from Oxfam in London. We had first snowfall in Baghdad in over 100 years, tornadoes in Cairo and London. In 2007, we had records on the number of tornadoes hit in New York City, Iran, and Oman. Tornadoes doubled in 2008 than prior years. Afghanistan suffered the worst weather in 30 years. More than 1 million homeless and flooding in China last year. The worst snowstorms in 50 years slams China, and millions are marooned. New Zealand volcanoes erupt without warning following some cyclones. 1.8 million people are evacuated as a typhoon pounds China, and heat waves kill people from Tennessee and across Europe. This is last year. And now this is the latest Oxfam London study report. Let me read just a couple sentences here. You'll see what we're talking about in terms of weather. London reports that natural disasters have quadrupled in the last 20 years, with flooding worldwide increased sixfold. The planet is now experiencing about 500 natural disasters per year compared to the last 100-year norm of 120 per year. This Oxfam study was compiled using data from the Red Cross, the United Nations, and specialist researchers at Leuven University in Belgium. This summarizes it all. Quote, "This is not a freak year," referring to it now. "It follows a pattern of more frequent, more erratic, more unpredictable, and more extreme weather events that are affecting more people," unquote. And a lot of Earth's weather is also connected directly with the sun. And what you would expect, whatever affects as our solar system gets closer, the sun is nothing but a star. It will be affected by this plane as well. And anything that affects the sun is going to have repercussions on the world's weather. Let me give you an example of what's happening with the sun. 2003 was the end of the solar minimum. You know, the 11-year solar cycle. Next solar maximum, as we know, was 2012. Well, during the year of the solar minimum, 2003, the sun literally went on, and the NSA reports, and I quote, "a rampage." And it had more X-class flares during a solar minimum than any time they had in recorded history. I mentioned briefly a couple of the X-class flare numbers. They are afraid of what's going to happen. If that was a minimum, they're afraid is what's going to happen when the solar minimum, which just coincidentally happens to reside at the time that we're saying that we should be nearest the center of this galactic plane. NSA just released a report, the NSA being the National Academy of Sciences. They released a report, and they were referencing a power grid breakdown, the largest major solar storm that had ever existed in the history of recording, happened in 1859. And it caused telegraph wires to short out in the United States and Europe. From that little bit of information, they were able to surmise the energy, project what type of event is about to happen. And the report is actually incredibly scary. They indicated that as a result of the solar minimum years, a remarkable rampage occurred with 10 major solar flares, and it knocked out 2 Earth-orbiting satellites and crippling an instrument aboard the Mars orbiter. They are indicating that this event, it's an if, they have no way of knowing, if the same type of storm occurs that occurred in 1859 during the solar maximum, and they expect it to be more intense because of what just happened a few years ago, that it has the potential of knocking out the power grid in the United States and all around the world. And let me quote, the power grids are so interconnected that a big storm, the type expected to occur about once a century, could cause a cascade of failures that would sweep across the United States, cutting power to 130 million people or more in less than a few minutes. Such widespread power outages, it goes on. It basically, by the end of the report, the entire country has just been thrown in the dark ages, and it could take up to 6 months to bring it up. That alone, if the shift never even happened, that alone could cause the type of pandemic we were talking about with foods being depleted from the stores in 3 days. Because in fact, when the report came out, Fox News reported that man can create electromagnetic fields, incredibly intense electromagnetic fields, but we can't create purely magnetic fields. A number of universities and scientists from all around the world are invited and going, and they all have their own individual reasons and what their universities are sending them for. My purpose is simply to measure flux variations and deviations to see how the magnetic field of the Earth is being affected by anything external, get any evidence whether it's stable and not moving or whether it's moving. We do know it wanders. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for very subtle micro changes. It is not our intent to cause fear or panic, even though it does. But by releasing the information as soon as we're able, we want to give people the ability to prepare. These things are going to happen. People's lives are going to fall apart, and we want them to know what's happening. Let me give you a quick scenario. Let's suppose somebody has cancer. You tell me what is better. Would you rather have cancer, not know, not be told, not be able to treat it, and not be able to look for yourself as to what is important in your life? Or would you rather be diagnosed, know what's happening so you can prepare, and most importantly, define for yourself what's truly important in your life? I mean, we hope that this will be a wake-up call for people. We want them to look around at what's happening in the world. Find out for themselves the information. It is available. We will do everything we can to make it available to people. We want them to find out what's truly important for their life, what has real and lasting meaning, and what would be considered a waste of time. We believe this will help people live more fulfilling lives and prepare for this event. We haven't really looked at the geometries of the Earth, and you know what? There is no way we can predict where the pole shift is going to be. And so without knowing where it's going to be, we don't know where, honestly, would be the safe places would be from a scientific viewpoint. For example, underneath the Arctic, Antarctica is a massive 600 million square miles of tropical forest, sunk to the bottom of the ocean and frozen. That didn't happen over thousands of years. Otherwise, there would be no evidence of the forest. But it's a frozen, massive tropical forest. That resulted, that was many pole shifts back, and that was a massive pole shift. So if that type of shift occurs, the entire continent could disappear and be somewhere else. So we have no way of knowing what's going to be safe and what's not, so we need to prepare. In fact, I just want to indicate, because this really does sound like science fiction, I want to give people a real sense of how delicate this planet is. Our Earth is really fragile. It spins weightless in space, frictionless almost, in space on its axis as it travels around the sun. So it's basically this free-floating ball. Any external influence on it will be enough to cause it to wobble. Einstein himself addressed this issue when he said the Earth is so fragile that all you needed to do was melt the polar ice cap to a significant amount and the Earth would shift, have a geographic pole shift, and decimate the planet. Also, to show you how delicate the planet is, none of us were alive, and we do not have serious recorded history that gives us details about the last catastrophic pole shift, but we do have details about how fragile the planet is. In 705 BC, we assume, you can follow the assumption why we assume this later, we assume a gravitational body, not the galactic plane, a gravitational body, maybe a massive planet, black hole, who knows what it was, passed the planet in 705 BC. Here's the result. It caused the planet literally to stop revolving in its current direction. Stop revolving. Go backward for approximately what we would consider 10 hours. Then it resumed its normal rotational spin. Our computer model shows what range of gravitational forces, how they must have approached the planet, and how they must have left the planet proximity as they passed by in the direction opposite to the rotational spin of the planet in order for that effect to happen. This is recorded by many, many civilizations on that date, and yet it's not taught in schools, is how delicate the planet is. There were 15 major civilizations at that time. It's 705 BC. It was recorded in King Hezekiah's day as the sun moved backward up the Sun Palace steps by 10 steps before resuming its normal direction. At the very same time, the Chinese, as you know, were tremendous ancient astronomers. They record on that very same day from one-third of the way from the planet of the Middle East. They recorded the event as the sun sat in the west, rose back up again from the west, almost to the high noon position, and then resumed its normal path. It's the day they refer to as the sun set twice in one day. Now, this is the final effect. That effect, before that day, the 15 major civilizations on Earth, they all had calendars, and they were all astronomers, and they had very accurate calendars, and all their calendars were based on 360-day years. These calendars were the major civilizations at that time were the Assyrians, the Chaldeans, the Egyptians, the Hebrews, the Persians, Greeks, Phoenicians, Chinese, Mayans, and Hindus, and there's three others that I can barely pronounce. What happened is after that date, the Earth now turned on its axis 365 revolutions in its path around the sun to meet one solar year. It took only 2 years before all of these civilizations realized and were able to properly compute the new speed around the sun and the spin rate in order to readjust the 15 standard calendars at that time. Numus Pompilius, he was the second king of Rome at the time. He reorganized their calendar of 360 days by adding 5 days per year. King Hezekiah, Numa's contemporary, reorganized the Jewish calendar by adding a month each Jewish leap year, and others made different adjustments. But this is what I would refer to as a modern-day event. That was less than 3,000 years ago to show us how delicate our planet is. Yeah, that just... a very small gravitational force like that could affect the planet. Whatever caused it, it was temporary, and it was flying by the planet, which only pulled it a little bit and then released it. And then the planet went on its merry way. But if the solar system would pass through a fixed gravitational wave, you can see that the devastation would be far greater. So what we're talking about coming up in the immediate future is far greater than what we have documented by 15 different civilizations less than 3,000 years ago. They've mapped out very accurately the last three pole shifts. And the last three pole shifts only changed by about 30 degrees each. So if you project maximum worst-case scenario, because the worst-case scenario is where the new equator sits. It's not where the pole sits, it's where the new equator sits, because the new equator defines, with respect to the old equator, which land masses drop into the ocean and which land masses rise from the ocean. So if you want the safest place on Earth, where do you go? You go as close to the North Pole as you can, because if it shifts only 30 degrees, no matter where it shifts, you're still far away from the new equator. That's why I believe the Norwegians planted the Doomsday Vault above the Arctic Circle on a rocky island 600 feet, and they drilled into solid rock 600 feet in the air, above sea level. Those type of places are rare and far between, and I'm not about to, live in northern Canada. So first of all, the subtle signs. The Chandler wobble stopped. It stopped at the same time the sun went on a massive solar flare a few years after that. And that subtle signs, and that happened in 1998. And the Chandler wobble has been a very, very consistent wobble every year for hundreds and hundreds of years. And the moment we start to move through the galactic plane, it stops, and now it's acting erratic. We have dangerous sunspot solar flares that occur during a solar minimum. The abnormal weather patterns are getting worse. The earthquakes are occurring in more diverse places, killing more people. These are the subtle signs. But if you look at these subtle signs, and they're all happening at the same time, and when I say, for example, we have 500 natural disasters a year that should not be occurring. And this just happened in the last 2 to 3 years. So we are definitely heading towards something not good. All the evidence does show it's pointing to, and then on top of all the physical evidence and scientific evidence and the cyclic evidence, we have prophecy that for some reason it all seems to mesh with what we believe scientifically is going to happen. Oh, and it does make kind of sense because we don't try, as scientists, we don't try to add or our interpretation to what things are said that we cannot prove or disprove. We don't say that certain legends meant this. We just take them for what they said. The Mayans could have simply said, when this event happens, the harvesting of souls, it could simply have meant that many people will die. And, of course, they would in this event. So I would stay away from the coast. There's no way to prevent it. We'd have to change the course of the solar system, it's been very consistent for, ever since the solar system formed. It just cyclically moves up and down the galactic plane, and this event happens over and over again. We can see this cyclic event very clearly solidified in, I don't know how many pole shifts back it would have been, but we can clearly see it solidified at least 600,000 years by looking at the Antarctic and Greenland ice core samples, which measure year to year the temperature and the CO2 atmospheric concentration that's locked in the ice core sample during those years. This cyclic pattern is extremely repeatable. 600,000 years. I think we are given all the warning we're going to be given. We're seeing all the signs. We know we know scientifically that if there is this galactic plane, as the ancients tell us, at the new quantum physicists tell us today would be the effects, and the astrophysicists tell us that if the center of our galaxy is a black hole, supermassive black hole and spinning, this would be a wave sitting there. The astronomers tell us we're heading toward it. There's no turning back. All the sciences are merging together to say that there's going to be basically no warning. It's simply like the day in 705 BC where the Earth stopped and shifted direction and released and went in its normal direction again. There was no warning for that. In this particular case, there won't be any warning as well, I don't believe. Well, like I said, each of the universities and scientists that we deal with, they have their own pet reasons for going to the North Pole. We don't have any scientific evidence whatsoever, and some of the people who are backing in this expedition want to check out certain anomalies that it keeps too while at the North Pole on this expedition. But we are coming on this expedition for our own reasons and our own intent. The scientists that we deal with are the top-notch scientists around the planet, and we does provide information along with many geophysicists, linguistics, geologists, astrophysicists, just one of at least 150 scientists. People are in denial. They want to think the world continues the way it does. For example, the scenario of 705 BC, it is so well clearly documented. Anybody who really wants to look at it can. And the information that we have is presented by NASA, it's presented by quantum physicists around the world. The thing that we do that nobody else does is we pull it all together. The way science is structured today, everybody specializes. In fact, the specialization is too specific so that since there's no incentive to cross-correlate information from, say, astrophysics to geology to genetics to quantum physics or any ancient technology lost or mitochondria DNA, because there's no incentive to have all of these different groups of scientists talk to each other, because they can't talk to each other anyway because they speak different languages and they don't know what piece of information they have that may solve a puzzle in another field. They don't. That's where we have created this years ago, and we go and gather the information to assist in solving these problems, and they work with us in order to reconcile the differences as the information from other fields is brought to their attention. Finishing up prophecy, we have several thousand more documents. Like I said, we just went to the Middle East where literally there's over 14,000 different documents and fragments of documents prophesying what's coming up. Combining that with the other prophecies around the world in different cultures, within the next few months we will have compiled this